Well, good morning, and I want to welcome members of the Sea Power and Projection Forces and Readiness Subcommittees to our hearing today. Before we begin, we just have two logistical matters that I would like to take care of. The first one is I'd like to ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there any objection? Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. In addition to that, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Admiral Davidson be allowed to make an opening statement on behalf of the Navy and the respective Navy witnesses. Is there objection? Without objection, it's so ordered. As I mentioned, we welcome everyone here today to this joint subcommittee on Sea Power Projection Forces and Readiness subcommittees at our hearing today. I want to offer a special welcome to our full committee chairman, Mr. Thornberry. As everyone knows, Chairman Thornberry has been the leader of our ongoing efforts to mitigate our military readiness challenges, and I want to thank him for his leadership and for being here today to hear about the United States Navy. This hearing follows a congressional delegation and listening session that members of our committee conducted on Monday aboard Naval Station Norfolk, the aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the destroyer, the USS McFall. While in Norfolk, we had a chance to meet with a number of Navy sailors, including the witnesses that are testifying before us today. Today, we'll have Captain Scott F. Robertson, the commanding officer of the USS Normandy. Captain, thank you for being here. We have Captain Randy Stearns, the Commodore and strike fighter for Wing Atlantic. Captain, thank you for joining us. We have Captain Gregory McRae, the Deputy Commander, Submarine Squadron 6. And Captain, thank you for joining us. And Captain Paul Odenthal, Commander of the Naval Construction Group 2. Captain, we thank you for joining us today. I'm also particularly delighted to have Admiral Davidson, the Commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, who will make an opening statement this morning. We have a special guest with us here in the audience. That's Captain Robertson's wife, Kelly. Last year, Captain Robertson and his crew were underway for a whopping 313 days, including their wedding anniversary and likely many other important family events. Today, his duty once again called him away from home on his anniversary. And at least on this anniversary, I want to get him out of the doghouse a little bit. And I want to thank Kelly for her service and her support for her husband, and to recognize all the sacrifices she and our other Navy spouses and families make for our country. I'm grateful to everyone for being here, but I want to thank the captains in particular for first giving us their perspectives in Norfolk and then coming up to Washington to share them with additional members. I think it's very important that we hear not just from senior Navy leaders, but from the operators and warfighters like yourselves who are dealing with readiness challenges firsthand. When we met with our witnesses down in Norfolk, one of them characterized his current role and responsibility as the commander of a Navy unit as, quote, managing scarcity. Our sailors do not sign up to manage scarcity. They sign up to defend their families, their homes, their country. They sign up to defend our families, our home, and our country. Every day, our sailors have a duty to defend America. It's time that we as Americans realize we have a duty to defend them. Hopefully, we take a major step in that this morning. I think that the term is a very good description of the challenges that our men and women in uniform and the civilians that support them are dealing with across the fleet and in the Navy sister services. While I firmly believe that the United States Navy is still the world's best, I'm concerned about shortfalls in force structure and readiness and the trend lines that we can see. Over the past year, we've heard from the Chief of Naval Operations that we're returning to an era of great power competition in which our maritime superiority will be contested by other countries. We've heard about ship deployments growing from 5.5 to as many as 10 months in length. We've heard about carrier gaps in Asia and the Middle East. We've heard that shortfalls in the number of amphibious ships are driving the Marines to consider deploying aboard foreign ships. And we've heard that only 1 in 4 of our strike fighters is fully mission capable and ready for combat. And finally, we've received data showing that next year around the world, we will only be able to fulfill 56% of our commanders' request for carriers, 54% of the request for amphibious groups, 42% of the request for submarines, and 39% of the request for cruisers and destroyers. The conclusion that I think we should all be drawing from what we hear is that we're not currently providing our Navy with the resources it needs to do what we ask, at least not without burning out our ships and our planes and our sailors and undermining our long-term readiness. As members of these subcommittees know, the Navy will always answer the nation's call. It always has. If we require it, the Navy can and will run its ships and sailors ragged and send them into battle without all the weapons and training and maintenance they should have. But we do not want to do that. We want to take care of our men and women in uniform and maintain peace through strength with a Navy that is robust and ready to deter potential aggressors. We never, ever want a fair fight. In our witnesses' prepared statement, it says that we are recovering from our lowest readiness point in many years. As a Congress, we have the responsibility to provide and maintain a Navy, but I believe that the resources we've been allocating to that critical function of government have been woefully inadequate. Today, I hope to hear from both senior Navy leaders and our operators and warfighters what that means for our Navy and for our national security, so that our perspectives and insights can guide our decisions in days and years ahead. With that, I now turn things over to the gentleman from Virginia, the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, my good friend Chairman Whitman, for any opening remarks that he might have. Rob?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your leadership. Chairman Thornberry, thank you. Ranking Member Courtney and Ranking Member Bordallo, we deeply appreciate all of the efforts here. Gentlemen, thank you. Thanks so much for your leadership and your distinguished service to our nation and all the things that you do to make sure that our Navy and our Marine Corps have the things that they need when asked to go into harm's way. Every service branch we know today is suffering from readiness deficits, and we know that those shortfalls in training and equipment have serious consequences for our warfighters. This hearing will give us the opportunity to hear from the men and women on the ground, in the air, and on the water who deal with the devastating effects of our readiness shortfalls on a daily basis. If Congress is to address the obstacles that successive cuts in defense spending have posed, we need a clear, unadulterated view of the challenges our forces are facing. The testimony that you will provide today will give us an invaluable view in that regard. We are looking into the challenges ahead, and these are the ones we see as our fleets dwindle and as our sailors and their families suffer under the strain of less training and longer deployments. In March, Vice Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Michelle Howard testified before the Readiness Subcommittee that the Navy is still paying down the readiness debt we accrued over the last decade. And to the Senate Armed Services Committee, she said that sequestration is the greatest threat to our future readiness. It has a ripple effect for us throughout the years. Today, our subcommittees would like to hear from you, our nation's operational leaders, about maintenance status of our equipment, the operational availability of our ships, aircraft, and weapons systems, and perhaps most importantly, the obstacles you face as you train our sailors to meet the challenges ahead. Gentlemen, I thank you for your service. As a reminder of what we all are faced with, tomorrow at the United States Naval Academy, we will commission over 1,000 new naval officers, both as ensigns in the Navy and as second lieutenants in the Marine Corps. All of us have an obligation, not only for those officers, but those that enlist in the Navy and Marine Corps, to make sure that we never forget what it takes to provide for them the proper training, the proper equipment that they need to, as Chairman Forbes said, to have overwhelming superiority so they can fight to victory and come home safe. That is our unending obligation, both here as elected leaders and for you as our military leaders. We all take that challenge seriously, and I know, and I'm confident that we will face that challenge. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Whitman. And now it's my privilege to recognize my partner on the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee, the ranking member, Mr. Joe Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Whitman for holding today's hearing on Navy force structure and readiness, and for both of your leadership in terms of what has been a very strong, I think, bipartisan effort both in sea power and readiness that became part of the House Defense Authorization Bill. I have a written statement which I'm going to enter for the record because we want to hear from the witnesses this morning. I just, in quick summary, this year we've heard a refrain from combatant commanders, whether in the Pacific, whether it was Admiral Harris, General Breedlove in the North Atlantic, again, really stressing the need for more Navy assets to be deployed. Admiral Harris, with no prompting, said he needs more ships and submarines, period. General Breedlove said at best we're playing zone defense in terms of what's happening with a resurgent Russian Navy. This year, we, I think, came out with a very strong mark in terms of shipbuilding, 10 ships, as the chairman noted, the largest boost since the Reagan era in terms of investment in shipbuilding. But as all of the witnesses know, that's the long game. You don't build a sub overnight or a carrier overnight or a destroyer. And in the meantime, we've got to focus on what is really the focus of today's hearing, which is that we've got to have the operational availability. And that means looking at something that sometimes doesn't get quite the banner headlines that maybe shipbuilding does. And that's obviously making sure that the readiness investments and systems are in place so that when Admiral Harris or General Breedlove is putting out a demand signal, that the country can respond to it. Again, there is no better testimony than the folks that are here at the table this morning. Admiral Davidson, it's good to see you again after our visit last year earlier. And Captain Stearns, thank you again for the Codel that we organized. And again, Congress has some skin in this game as well. CRs do not make this problem any easier, and I hope we're going to hear from the witnesses about ways that we can help from the legislative branch in terms of making sure there's that horizon so that, again, these critical needs are going to be satisfied. And again, I want to thank, again, both chairmen for organizing this important hearing today. Ask that my written statement be entered for the record and yield back.
Without objection, all the written statements will be entered as part of the record. And with that, we're privileged to recognize now the gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, who is standing in as the ranking member for the Readiness Subcommittee today. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Whitman as well, and Mr. Courtney. And thank you all for making yourselves available again today. In July 2010, these two same subcommittees convened to discuss Navy readiness, and 2 years have passed since the USS Chosen, which is now homeported in San Diego, undergoing modernization, and the Stout had been deemed unfit for combat operation because of their readiness condition. In March 2009, the Readiness Subcommittee examined issues the Navy faced in sustaining its surface force ships for their expected life and beyond. The Navy reported at that hearing that it had been taking material steps to address gaps in ship maintenance funding and to assess ship material conditions. So today, over 6 years later, we're continuing to discuss not only the readiness concerns of the Navy's non-nuclear surface ships, but also shortfalls in naval aviation, expeditionary forces, and other aspects of readiness. As members of these subcommittees heard on Monday in Norfolk, the Navy now faces readiness concerns with its submarine force as well. A lack of readiness resonates with our ability to keep Americans safe and confront new and dynamic threats across the globe. And as our Navy executes its pivot to the Pacific, while still carrying out operations against the Islamic State, there's never been a more crucial time to have a well-equipped, well-trained force. These readiness issues, of course, as Mr. Courtney said, did not arise overnight. What the Navy's experiencing now and what the subcommittees are attempting to fix in the 2017 defense bill are the consequences of years of high operational tempo experienced by a smaller fleet. Again, happy anniversary. I think it's an appropriate time to recognize high operational tempo. And fewer aircraft with experienced sailors and civilian employees to sustain them. The Navy is grappling with these past decisions that reduce waterfront maintenance organizations and shore infrastructure, process changes to force-wide ship maintenance practices and training processes, and the failed optimum manning initiative, and efforts to derive efficiencies instead of pursuing and insisting upon effectiveness. So the Navy began responding to declining material readiness conditions by increasing manning, improving training, providing enduring technical oversight of maintenance, and reestablishing clear lines of authority and accountability. But the efforts were rendered less effective, I think, as Mr. Courtney suggested, by the sequestration in 2013. So when coupled with reductions in skilled personnel at aviation depots and fleet shipyards, severe challenges in obtaining spare parts for legacy systems, late receipt of funds due to the failure of Congress to reach a budget agreement, and high operational tempo required by the complex security environment, to put it lightly, it's not surprising we're dealing with some call a readiness crisis. In an area of new and dynamic threats, it's our responsibility to navigate these challenges and provide for a 21st century force that has the tools and capability to respond to security threats anywhere, anytime. And I welcome the opportunity today to hear from our witnesses about some of the challenges you're facing. And I encourage my colleagues to seriously consider the long-term financial commitments that accompany the readiness solutions that we're proposing in the fiscal year 2017 authorization bill, which will soon go to conference with the Senate. Thank you again for being here, gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman Peters. And Admiral Davidson, you've got a lot on your shoulders. The whole Fleet Forces Command, a lot of men and women that are depending upon you, including the entire country. We appreciate so much all that you do, and we appreciate you being here today, and we'd love to turn the floor over to you now for any comments that you can offer to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Forbes. Chairman Thornberry, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Courtney, Ranking Member Peters.
Admiral, these mics are a little funny. You might want to kind of pull it up close so that everybody can hear you.
And distinguished members of the Sea Power and Projection Forces and Readiness Subcommittees, good morning, and thank you for your active interest in fleet readiness. I appreciate your comments very, very much. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce these witnesses today, these exceptional captains you see before you, here to testify about our Navy. These are just a very few of the extraordinary men and women we call upon to lead our Navy at the tactical level, and I think you will be impressed. Most importantly, they are on the front lines of fleet readiness. As the fleet commander, I am charged by the Chief of Naval Operations to make the fleet ready. That is to say, prepared, to do the mission the Congress has given us in law, to be prepared for prompt and sustained combat, incident to operations at sea. In my book, there can only be one standard for that. It has to be ready, prepared to fight and win. We know the American people expect nothing less, and frankly, we expect nothing less of ourselves. I won't belabor adversary and threat details as testified to you by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the CNO, and numerous other experts. They have made clear the evolving international security environment, the nations and actors who would challenge the world order, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and terror groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda. These countries and entities, in different forms, are developing and procuring advanced and/or asymmetric systems to hold allies and partners at risk, to deny us our sea control in the Navy, and to threaten our homeland and our interests. In that light, the business of making the fleet ready to fight and win is much more difficult than the bumper sticker allows. Key to it is the prompt and sustained standard we receive from the law. To truly understand whether the fleet is ready, it must be understood that the Navy has to be able to do three things. First, we have to be able to rotate the fleet out on routine deployments around the globe. Second, we have to be able to surge the fleet in crisis. That means conflict, war. That means more ships, more squadrons, more submarines, and more groups forward in times of significant contingency or war, and then we have to be able to fix it and reset it after that. That means re-equip it, get it ready for the next possible contingency, and at the same time, continue to rotate it out on routine deployments. And third, we have to be able to maintain and modernize the fleet to ensure it is functional, viable, indeed credible, meaning ready to fight and win until its expected end of service life. Sometimes that is decades in the future. These three components of our readiness are all intertwined, and yet all in tension with one another. If we keep too many of our capabilities forward on routine deployments, we may not have the numbers we need to surge in crisis or the time to maintain and modernize these capabilities necessary for future success and future generations of sailors. Conversely, if too many of our ships and aircraft are in maintenance and modernization, then the combatant commanders do not have the credible combat power needed to deter and dissuade potential adversaries and competitors, to assure our allies and partners, or to protect our maritime security and the homeland. Too much of one thing typically results in too little of another. Nevertheless, we must do those three things to meet the prompt and sustained standard established by Title X. That said, if there are not enough resources to do all three at once, we will typically favor our readiness for deployment over the two priorities. I owe that to our sailors today, and I am doing precisely that this year, 2016. Let me give you an example. Earlier this week, many of you visited the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. It is 39 years old. In just a few days, It will be on its way for its 5th routine deployment in the last 7.5 years. In just a few weeks, it will be flying strikes in combat against ISIS. It's the fleet's job to ensure those sailors in Ike and her escorts go on deployment with everything they might possibly need: food, fuel, repair parts, ordnance, the aircraft, the medical support, and most importantly, the training to succeed in their mission and return home safely. And that is the mandatory metric, to succeed on the mission. Our first priority is to make sure our deployed and deploying forces like Ike are fully ready, that they have everything they need to execute combat operations and succeed. We do a good job at this, but it is not without cost. For example, if I have to ensure that 10 like strike fighters are in a single squadron on that aircraft carrier, and they need the same capability, I will tax units that are back here at home, those designed to be later in for surge, or those in maintenance and modernization of aircraft, to make sure that we have the requisite aircraft forward. If I need 10 forward, I do routinely operate 4 aircraft in squadrons in the rear. If a ship forward with Ike Strike Group, for example, as would any of the 4 deployed ships, either home-ported overseas or deployed from CONUS, if they need a part that is not immediately available in their stores or not immediately available in their supply system, I will tax a ship back in the continental United States for that part, either out of their stores, or if I have to, I will take it directly out of a combat system to deliver to that ship forward. Ike Strike Group is ready to go, and I am committed to ensure that they are ready while they are forward. And all of it, the equipment, the ordnance, the sailors, and their training to make them ready for deployment, that is investing in the prompt part of the mission that you've given us in law. The sustained part. Sustainment means building deep preparedness. Our ships, squadrons, and other tactical units must be ready to be surged in time of conflict, as I said, or maintaining and modernizing for the threats of the future, and to deliver on the exceptional return of investment in your Navy. Ideally, the fleet maintains reliability in its platforms and proficiency in its sailors by sustaining readiness in its forces fresh off deployment. Additionally, we would endeavor to build readiness for full-spectrum conflict, great power competitors, as the CNO cited earlier this year, by doing more intense training for longer throughout the life of any ship or squadron. After all, these are the forces we would use to surge in conflict and war. Maintenance and modernization is just as important. Ike provides relevant combat power today, 39 years after her commissioning, because we invested in maintenance and upgrades throughout the years, including refueling the reactors, modernizing the combat systems aboard, and putting new aircraft in its air wing. My favorite metric: during Ike's nuclear refueling overhaul more than a dozen years ago, we removed more than 5,000 tons of wire, 5,000 tons of wire, and replaced it with fiber relevant to the capabilities needed in our combat systems for today and tomorrow. That investment in time and money is important. For me, in 2016, the fleet is challenged to provide that kind of sustained mission. We are $848 million short between Admiral Swift and the Pacific Fleet and myself of the operations and maintenance requirements. That's just 2% of the readiness requirement across the whole of Navy readiness. And the fleet will have to take action to meet our financial responsibilities. This shortfall developed based on a handful of emerging challenges this fiscal year, excuse me. First, we extended Truman Strike Group on deployment to support strike operations against ISIS. Second, we have observed increased costs with several aircraft, older F/A-18 A through D Hornets, both in the Navy and Marine Corps, and Marine Corps CH-53s and MV-22 Ospreys. The cost to maintain these aircraft this year is higher than modeled and anticipated. These aircraft are simply older than we anticipated when we bought them. We've been using them longer. Also, we are working hard to improve the supply and availability of repair parts with Navy F/A-18 E&F Super Hornets to improve their flight line readiness this year. Third, ship maintenance growth and execution has exceeded the planned and budgeted costs over a year ago. As a result, the fleet will have to take some risk, that is to say, incur consequences if they are not mitigated later for the longer term. Across both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets, we will delay 4 surface ship availabilities and 1 submarine major maintenance availability from the fourth quarter of this fiscal year into next year. We will also reduce 3 smaller, less intensive maintenance periods for 2 amphibious ready groups and 1 carrier strike group. That's an additional 12 ships. We will reduce the flying hours associated with one of our carrier air wings that is not expected to deploy in the next 2 years as well. Delaying these maintenance periods and pressing them into the next fiscal year, FY17, the budget currently under consideration, is not optimal, but it affects the smallest number of ships. I will not embark on a path that partially accomplishes all availabilities across the entire fleet. That is a dangerous practice that rapidly builds maintenance and capability backlogs that are difficult to recover. Indeed, we are digging out from that sort of policy more than a decade ago. As you can see, readiness in the Navy is a very complex discussion. Some of the risks, the consequences, if not mitigated later, are borne out with reduced training and readiness levels for our surge forces. Some of our risk is carried in longer-term sustainment, with maintenance delayed for our ships and our submarines. Accepting these risks means accepting less readiness across the whole of the Navy, less capacity to surge in crisis and wartime, or perhaps living with reduced readiness in our ships and submarines that would keep them from reaching the end of their service lives. In either case, recovering from these situations will cost us more in time and money in the future. These are the fleet readiness challenges and our plans to execute today in fiscal year 16. To provide the additional context from fleet operators, we have assembled before you a panel of 4 of our commanders. Captain Stearns, Commanding Officer of Strike Fighter Wing Atlantic. He leads all F&A 18 Hornet and Super Hornet training and readiness on the East Coast. Captain McRae, he's the Deputy Commodore of Submarine Squadron 6. He oversees the training and preparation of 7 attack submarines and their crews. Captain Odenthal, Commodore of Naval Construction Group 2. He heads up our Atlantic Seabees and underwater construction teams. And Captain Robertson is the Commanding Officer of USS Normandy, fresh off an around-the-world deployment last year, the Navy's first with our Navy's integrated fire control counter-air capability, an extraordinary capability, and his ship is in maintenance today. Like all of us, they are committed to ensuring the best possible readiness in the fleet for today and for our future. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Admiral Davidson, we thank you again for your service. Thank you for your opening remarks. And now the subcommittee can address our questions to each of our 4 witnesses that are here. And Captain Stearns, I would like to start with you. We all know that sometimes we talk in a lot of military ease. You know, we use terms, and I remember one time coming home from dinner with the CNO, my wife looked at me and she said, "Do you guys ever talk in English?" You know, well, we want to try to talk a little bit in English today, and one of the things that you are the commander of a strike fighter wing. A lot of power under your control and what you are doing, but I want to, oftentimes we realize that when you go places, you are trying to train and prepare in good times so that you are able to fight in bad times if they occur. I am very concerned about this statistic that I'm hearing, that only 1 out of 4 of our aircraft are capable, fully mission capable and ready for combat. I know in the good times you can say we've got enough out there. You heard Admiral Davidson talk about surge. A lot of people listening to this at home don't know what surge means. But if you have to go into that fight, what does it mean to you when you only have 1 out of 4 of your backups ready for combat?
One of that number, fully mission capable, and just to define the term here as we use it in the Hornet community, means that jet has everything it needs to go to war. So that 1 in 4 number that you put out now, that is our deployed forces, like Admiral Davidson said as well. So that is that 1 in 4 is currently deployed right now. That other 3 and 4 are the aircraft that are back in the maintenance phase or going through another FRP. So what that means is if you wanted to surge more than what we have, and we talked about our 4 air wings that are out right now, including 1 on the West Coast, and we have 1 in workups now and then 1 ready to go, which was the Ike down there in the Truman. Those are fully manned. But if you wanted to pull back, it would take me over 6 to 12 months to get another air wing back here of that 3 and 4 aircraft back up, ready to go.
So explain the impact of that and the risk that it has to you. If you're in a conflict, obviously if you're not in a conflict, it's not going to matter that much. But if you're in a conflict based on our op plans, how important are those planes to you, and how risky is it that you'd have to wait 6 to 12 months to get them?
It's at the bottom of the chain. There's no chance of getting those ready. The metric I had when I was a department head, just to put it into context, was about a 90-day surge. We could have the parts and aircraft to get an air wing out and a squadron up if we actually resourced them out in 90 to 120 days. It's going to take 3 times as long to get that out now. So it means that there's nothing to pull from in the back. We've already pulled everything forward. There's nothing left in the.
So if you're in a fight, you do not have anything to pull from in the back right now, and it would be 6 to 12 months before you would have it ready to.
As of today, we don't have that surge capacity right now.
The other thing that I would like to talk about, and Admiral Davidson mentioned taxing planes back here, taxing ships, and another word for that is, I think you sometimes use the term cannibalization of our aircraft, which is basically taking parts off of one aircraft to be able to use to fix the other ones to fight. Well, we already have a situation where 3 out of 4 of our aircraft are not fully mission capable to back you up if you need it. Tell me about, this term we use is hangar queens or cannibalization. Are you using a plane in the hangar now that you're taking parts off of to put on other parts to fly?
That's a regular occurrence, and cannibalization or taking parts off that is our last resort. We work through the supply system, and as you know, our A through Ds are stuck in the depot because of unforeseen utilization. Our Super Hornets, we've had parts problems over the past 3 years, starting in 2012 with sequestration, and there was some other factors that played into that as well, but we've never caught up. And absolutely, so what that means to you is that that's the last resort. We're pulling that off an aircraft, and I was the one talking about managing scarcity, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, managing scarcity. I have to decide what squadron. I have 3 squadrons right now that I had to call and tell, hey, be ready, you're the donors for the Truman extension. That was not paid for. That was unforeseen. That's a tax back here on the system as well.
So, Captain, let me be clear. 3 out of 4 of your strike fighters not capable, fully mission capable right now. It takes 6 to 12 months to get them there. But in addition to that, what you have to do is, as a last resort, go on other planes that you have, take parts off of those planes instead of coming from the depots or where you'd have parts, so that you can keep the planes flying that you need to keep flying. Fair?
Fair assessment on that.
And you are having to do that now.
Yes, sir.
Captain McRae, one of the things that we're very concerned about, Mr. Courtney and I are looking at the number of attack submarines we have. We know we're going down from 52 to 41 in 2029. And I'm very concerned about some of the work that has to be done on some of our submarines. You told us a story, I believe, about the USS Albany that was so, and we call them availabilities, but basically it was so, needed so much work on it, broke so much that the crew never actually got to deploy. They stayed in the shipyard basically the whole time. Is that a reference to that, or am I incorrect on that?
Yes, sir. So what I was speaking of specifically was the maintenance overruns that we're experiencing in our shipyards, and those overruns and depot-level maintenance that cause us, when the ship is not returned to the fleet on time as expected, that causes us to lose what we call operational days for that submarine. And it's that loss of operational days that has the direct impact on our ability to execute our mission and provide the readiness that we're required to provide.
So during that period of time, as I understand it, that submarine stayed in the shipyard its entire time for that crew. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. So they entered the shipyard. They originally were scheduled to enter the shipyard. This is USS Albany we're talking about, in October of 2013. Back at that time, we were going through sequestration and budgetary concerns, and there was a lot of instability in our funding levels moving forward. So the decision was made to push the start of the overhaul off 3 months, and then we actually commenced that overhaul at Norfolk Naval Shipyard in January of 2014. Originally, the overhaul was scheduled to be 28.5 months, and that estimate is based on previous execution by that shipyard doing similar platforms. So it's an estimated calculation as far as how long it should take based on execution, recent execution. Prior to that, Newport News had come out in about 28 months, which is why that was selected. Since entering the shipyard, due to resource challenges that the shipyard has experienced, due to prioritization, due to the workforce challenges that I think you all have been briefed on, the schedule, and I'm seeing this from the squadron perspective, the schedule continued to slide to the right, meaning they weren't meeting their key events. And so about every 3 months or so, we would get a new schedule that essentially continued to push timelines to the right throughout the last 2.5 years. So today, we are looking at a 43-month overhaul for a maintenance period that was supposed to last 28 months. And the impact of that is significant in a lot of different ways. Certainly the operational days that are lost. Those are days that we will never recover because the whole life on that submarine is finite. And so we'll never be able to recapture those days. But it also has an impact on the other submarines that we have and the other crews that we have and the mission that we have to meet every day to be able to provide that resource to the nation. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the overruns.
And
for all
Captain, what was the impact of that on the commanding officer of the Albany?
Yes, sir. So one of the stories that I had relayed was, and I just talked to Wade just a couple days ago, actually. So one of the tertiary effects of overruns like this that people don't often talk about are the impact to crew and their families. So we're responsible for maintaining crew readiness in terms of professional development, experience at sea, developing them as operators, as warfighters, as leaders, and we put a lot of focus, obviously, and emphasis on that. For a submariner to really get trained and certified and qualified and be war ready, he needs to be at sea, and he needs to be operating at sea. Because of the delays on Albany, many of the sailors that have reported in for their first sea tour on the Albany will start and end their sea tour in the shipyard. And what I had relayed was that sailors don't join the submarine force to sit on a barge in a shipyard. They really want to be on a submarine at sea. And I've seen that throughout the last 24 years. So the impact specifically for the commanding officer, because he was in a similar situation, he began his tour thinking that he was going to carry the ship through the shipyard period, come out on the back end, execute all the required certifications, inspections, prove that his team was warfighting ready, execute sea trials, and then restore that submarine to full operational capability, and he was excited to do that. But because of the delays now, he will actually be relieved and have his change of command with the ship still in the shipyard. Because of that, as a part of that, he has decided to submit his resignation and retire from the Navy rather than continue service.
So we lost the commanding officer of that submarine because basically the most water he saw was probably the water fountains around where the ship was being fixed. And if it has an impact on him, would it be fair to conclude it's having an impact on the crew as well?
It absolutely is. And that was one of the things in talking to some of the officers and men that I confirmed was that there are other effects. So, for example, the executive officer that carried them through much of the shipyard period did not select for command at sea. The engineer that they previously had, who was by all measure a great performer, but at the shipyard doesn't really have that capacity to demonstrate his warfighting expertise. It's a challenging environment to rank against your peers, and we're a very competitive force. Also did not select for executive officer. So I'm not saying that that's the only reason they didn't select, but I can certainly tell you that inhibiting their ability to execute their warfighting mission at sea and become fully proficient and qualified and certified and run those crews and do those missions certainly inhibits their professional development and their advancement in the service.
Captain Robertson, I want to ask you a personal question, and we get to do that here, fortunately. If Admiral Davidson asked you to do something, I know, based on your professionalism, you're going to salute and say, yes, sir, and you're going to go do it. If you have to go do it, my suspicion is Kelly's going to be a supportive wife and say, go do it, and I'm going to keep the home fires burning. You've missed a lot of anniversaries. We talked about some of them today. Even aside from you, tell me the impact on the men and women who serve under you when we stretch these deployments from 5 months, as they were about 8 years ago, to 7, 8, 9, 10 months, where some of them are going in. What's the real-life impact to them? And just as Captain McRae talked about people at some point in time saying, I've got enough, whether it's the officer of the submarine or whether it's the crew, what's the real-life impact to those men and women, both that serve under you, but you have served with throughout these years, when they're asked to give up another anniversary, another baseball game, another birthday?
Sure. Happy to answer that question. It's kind of complex, strictly because, when you're talking about a junior sailor experiencing a deployment for the very first time, there's no expectation of what it's going to be like.
Include in that the impact to their family, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no doubt. And actually, Kelly and I were just talking about this very fact yesterday, how we've seen as our deployments have gotten longer, where they originally were 6 months and now just finishing a 9.5-month one deployment. We felt very fortunate. We were mature enough to be able to absorb that. But our junior sailors certainly, wind up taking the brunt of that. There is a lot of missed birthdays and anniversaries and sporting events and recitals. So there's no doubt that there certainly is a real personal challenge with these long deployments, and it certainly stresses the families. But I have to also add, though, that our sailors, when they know in advance what their deployment length is going to be, they can prepare for it. And my crew knew in advance we were doing a long deployment. So we were really able to condition the families, make sure the infrastructure was there for them, to best prepare them as much as we could for this extra long deployment. So, and as such, I was rewarded with good morale on my ship and a pretty good morale back home. But you can't overstate, you can't forget the humanistic impact of everything that they do miss.
We were told when we actually had lunch on Monday with some of the individuals there that, their families actually get ribbons that they start putting up and cutting as they're looking 60 days out and 30 days out. And then when all of a sudden those deployments are changed, that it has an enormous impact on the children and the families. Is that your experience or what you've heard?
Absolutely. I do have experience with a short notice extension on deployment. And when I was in Commander Command, we were scheduled for a 6.5-month deployment. And just prior to us departing, out chopping, or leaving the theater of operation to return home, we were extended for another 4 weeks. So, and that was a challenge from a morale perspective. Certainly, it was easier for me to build morale on the ship. Hey, our Navy needs us, our country needs us on mission. I certainly know that it was much bigger impact back home. Return parties, vacations planned, reunions. So that was so a change in schedule is really hard on our families.
Good. Chairman Whitman.
Thank you, Chairman Forbes. I want to drill down a little bit more on Chairman Forbes' question, Captain Stearns, about aircraft. We talked about the availability of those aircraft, but what I want to look is how we generate that availability. And obviously, there at Oceana, you deal not only with the aircraft availability, but also depots. And we've gone from a backlog in the depots of about 11 aircraft now up to 200 aircraft. So that pipeline is a significant issue. Throughput hasn't changed. I know that we've made a lot of plans to try to manage that, but if that capacity and throughput hasn't changed, that still creates a situation that we're dealing with. That we have E2Ds that don't have spare parts, so we're going through all of those machinations, trying to figure out a way through this. Great recovery plans in place, but I think as you pointed out, time is the limiting factor there. But time's not only the limiting factor, but the throughput, the capacity there in our depots. Well, first of all, how does that backlog in aircraft affect operational readiness? And you pointed to that a little bit, but I want to know how does it affect things in the long term? And what do we have to do to be able to shorten that time period? You pointed out to now it being 3 times as long as it would otherwise have been. How does it affect things today? Let's say a scenario where we have to push the button, and it's more than just those forces forward deployed. And I want to understand a little bit more about that, and you alluded to earlier, but then what do we need to do to make sure that we are able to generate the throughput to, as quickly as we can, recover this lost readiness and these availability of these aircraft?
And thanks for the question. And,
Sure.
so there's 2 reasons why the depots are backlogged now, and that's wartime utilization and also the fact of the delay in our JSF that we had planned on having here as well. So that forced us into an extension of our A through D. So to put in perspective, the Navy has 35 F-18 squadrons, East, West Coast, Japan. 5 of those are the older legacy aircraft, the A through Ds as well, and the other 30 are Super Hornets. So they're backlogged. The depots were never set up to do what we call high flight hour, which means essentially we're extending them past the 6-hour, 8,000-hour to 10,000-hour life that they were ever expected to fly just to meet the operational demand. So now they're forced into a 3-year lead time just to make the parts for these kits to getting in there, and it's all a capacity problem. The jets coming out the backside are a great product that our civilian workforce puts out. They can only do so much because they were never set up to do that. Yeah. So that's the risk for that. And right now I have 4 of my 5 legacy squadrons in a FRP right now, in a cycle either deployed or not. And I have to mix some of those older aircraft that are probably don't have enough hours on them, we're not going to use them for deployment anymore, into that squadron, so they don't have the capability as they go through there. Our goal is to get them prior to advanced phase air wing Fallon. What that leads into the Super Hornet problem now, we've transitioned about 10 squadrons of Super Hornets unexpectedly into our, to get out of legacy and also to meet the gap for the JSF, just to meet operational demand. So now we're taxing hours and utilization on our attrition aircraft. Those were meant for our attrition aircraft and Super Hornet. Now we're utilizing that. So when those start going into the depot in a year and a half for normal maintenance, 6,000-hour maintenance, we got to get that legacy out of the depot right now. So it's a capacity problem. It's right back there. So we will have even less available surge force. It translates to less available surge force to send out the door. And I'm not so much worried about the A through D right now. We've got that. It's the Super Hornet coming that, as Admiral Manazar testified, I think in March, we're chewing up about 40 hours or 40 aircraft worth of hours a month. And if we're not, either buying that much or putting that much through the depot, we're falling behind.
How does that affect the fleet replacement squadron, where you go to get aircraft and the flying hours that have to be accrued there to make sure our pilots have the seat time so that when they do their pre-deployment workups and they get to the point to go on deployment, that they have the full complement of flight hours to make sure, because as you know, experience there, if you're missing it on the front end, you never can make it up on the back end. So kind of give me your perspective.
Exactly right. So our fleet replacement squadron almost has the same priority as our deployed squadrons, because if we lose a day of training, we're never going to get that back. So that's kind of what we call our seed corn, our investment into naval aviation in the future. So if that stops, the train wreck happens behind it because the fleet doesn't have pilots to get out there. So between the East and West Coast, we're behind on pilot production and WISO production to the fleet. So some of the fleet squadrons in the maintenance phase are short because we got to get those guys out the door. So it absolutely pays the price. But those squadrons are also the ones that will rob from the maintenance phase to make sure that they have what they need to keep the train going. But that's a very important part of the entire readiness train, is producing new folks.
Very good. Thanks, Captain Stearns. Captain Robertson, I wanted to go back to you. I noticed in your bio that you had you'd served earlier in your career as a young lieutenant also on the USS Normandy. So I wanted to get your perspective. I think you're in a unique position to give your viewpoint on where you saw that cruiser early in your career, but also younger in the life of the USS Normandy, and operational availability, readiness elements, at that point as of today. Give us your perspective. Kind of give us an historical perspective about what you saw then, what you saw today, and the differences, good or bad, in what we need to look at going into the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's really a night and day story. Returning to Normandy as a fully modernized cruiser, including the Navy integrated fire control capability, just from a kinetic reach capability, it's really a night and day story. The current modernized cruiser comes with not only impressive kinetic surface-to-air capability, but also a huge increase in undersea warfare for hunting or searching for submarines, or certainly for self-defense in a close-in fight with for the gun weapon system. There's also a big difference I noticed in the whole strengthening that comes with modernization of these cruisers. When I was previously on Normandy, out for storm evasion, we wound up actually with a number of superstructure cracks. Just due to known flexing points in the superstructure. I just finished an around the world cruise with some very significant seas, and we didn't have any of those because of the modernization. Hull stiffening really reinforced those flex points. So it really truly is a night and day difference. And just one other point on this is, we've taken a 26-year-old ship. And through modernization, it is currently the most powerful ship that you have in our Navy right now. So.
Very good. Thank you, Captain Robertson, and Kelly, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
As we warned you at the beginning, the bells are tolling, and they're tolling for us to go vote. I do not want to interrupt Mr. Courtney's questioning, so rather than have him start, if it's okay, Joe, we'll go ahead and take a break, and we're going to go vote, and then we'll be back, and we'll begin with Mr. Courtney at that time.
Getting ready to run over you here. All right.
when we left, we were getting ready to start with Congressman Courtney's questions, and so we'll recognize Mr. Courtney now for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, just to go back over a couple items that came up in the first round, Captain McRae, I wanted to just kind of drill down a little bit deeper on your point about the Albany delay, and what that means in terms of the submarine fleet long term. Again, we spent a lot of time in the committee looking at the tile charts in terms of the size of the fleet throughout the 20s and 30s, and obviously we're going to have this bathtub that we're doing our best to try and mitigate with some of the shipbuilding provisions in the defense bill this year. But your point is that having an extra 15 months in availability, it's not like having your car in the garage for 15 months with a tarp over it. That it's the year doesn't matter so much in that context, because it's the mileage that you're saving on the mileage. But with a submarine, you don't really save on the mileage because of just the whole life, as you mentioned. I was wondering if you could just sort of explain that a little bit more, so again, the record is clear about the fact that this is just pure wasted time.
Yes, sir. So, as you said, the whole lives of our submarines are carefully managed by the Submarine Force and the Naval Sea Systems Command. And we have varying intervals, operational cycle intervals, and operating intervals that we manage to ensure that those lives, they make it effectively to the end of life as designed. And as we have with some of our submarines, that we are even capable of potentially extending those lives depending on what we see in our certifications as they continue through their life cycle. Maintenance periods, major maintenance periods, we use to reset those op intervals and op cycles. And again, it's just something, those come with, whether it be maintenance that is done on the submarines themselves, or if it's just inspections and certifications that occur to certify that the material is holding up as expected. We don't find anything surprising, such as cracks or improper welds or those types of things, and that the submarine is doing the things we need it to do and meeting its end of life. So we'll reset those periodically. The major depot avails are obviously part of the life cycle maintenance, and those come at specific times in order to reset those intervals. It's all very finely tuned, kind of like gears in a turbine, if you will. So as the submarine maintenance period is delayed and that cycle gets off, we start impacting not only the life cycle for that particular submarine, but we also impact the life cycle of the other submarines around it. So for example, USS Boise is scheduled, because of her operating cycle and operating interval, to enter the shipyard this past October. Because of delays to the Albany, she's lined up to go into the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. Because of delays on Albany, we have been extending Boise's operational time in 3-month increments, just as we've been doing with Albany and trying to get her out of the shipyard and back to the fleet. As we do that, we run up against these op cycle and op interval limits to the point where now we are no longer capable of operating Boise at sea after this summer. So any delays after that in her start date will be days that Boise will sit tied up to the pier, not in a depot maintenance availability as she should be, but frankly just waiting on the depot maintenance to begin. And so it's almost double the lost days if you think of it in that perspective. We do everything we can locally to maximize the use of that time. We have been tasked to judiciously use all resources provided to us, and we take that charge very seriously. And so, for example, when Albany was delayed, we pulled in maintenance that we could get done outside of the overhaul package into that period before she went into the overhaul, so that that would just help with executing the timeline of the depot maintenance and hopefully get her out on time. We'll do the same thing with Boise while she sits tied to the pier, waiting on the overhaul to start. But clearly, it's a significant impact, and it's not as simple as saying, well, I've lost one submarine day because one submarine is extended in the dry dock and in the shipyard. It's actually much more than that.
All right, thank you. And so again, it's just that 15-month delay is just, again, it's just lost time for a vessel that cost roughly about $800 or $900 million to build back in the day, and they're now about $2 billion a pop these days. This is a really big cost to the country and to the taxpayer.
Yes, sir. And the other thing that I would mention is the operational aspect of that. Clearly, it affects the operations of the Albany and the people, as we talked about before. But again, now the duties and requirements leveraged on the submarine force for operational time, which is everything from forward deployments to local operations to sub-on-sub certifications and training that we do to hone our warfighting skills, all of those things now have to be levied on the other submarines that are available. So it crunches their schedules such that then they lose out on what we call commanding officer's discretionary time. The amount of time a commanding officer has to take his ship and his crew to sea and improve them and train them and get them up to the standards that he needs them to be. We constantly execute, assess, and improve. And the assessment part's important, but the improvement part, the time to go to sea and fix your ship, if you will, raise the standards on board, that's even more important. And when we crunch the schedules, many times that's what we see being compressed is that commanding officer's discretionary time. So we, as a force, do everything we can to defend it. But I will tell you, we are not 100% successful. And we many times can't achieve the levels of commanding officer's discretionary time that we would prefer.
Great. Thank you, Captain.
Yes, sir.
And I was going to ask Mr. Captain Odenthal some questions, but I think my friend to the left here is going to take over that. So thank you again for being here today. And I know your testimony is important to us. And with that, I'll yield back.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Now we recognize Congressman Peters for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Courtney, they don't always say I'm to your left, but that's nice. Appreciate that. That's hard to do. I did have a question for Captain Odenthal about the MILCON budget. In your written testimony, there was some issue that you made about the decreases, and maybe you could tell us where you're feeling those decreases the most, and in particular, preparing for new ships like the LCS. So maybe give us a little thumbnail about how MILCON decreases are affecting you.
Thank you for your question there. I'm really here, representing the Naval Construction Force, and I don't have, can't really speak to the overall MILCON budget of the Navy and how that is affecting the LCS platform.
Well, maybe then within your purview, you could tell us kind of how the MILCON's...
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe what we could do is have that submitted for the
That'd be
record
sure,
so you
okay.
could get that answer if that's okay,
All right.
Scott. Okay, so we'll do that and see if you can get us an answer back on that for the record. Thank you.
All right, and then I guess I'd also reference the Career Intermission Program, an innovative program for retention, and maybe Captain Robertson and McRae, you might talk a little bit about what you're hearing. Maybe you touched on this before with the op tempo and all that, but what are some of the issues that you're having, what you hear from your crew about the reason that maybe the number one reason that they don't serve longer?
Well, thank you for your question. Speaking just from within my own lifelines within the ship, we're really starting to groom a very competitive force with the sailors that we do have. And so we weigh performance very heavily. And so there's really an onus on the sailors and a desire to really perform, because if you don't perform, you're not even going to have the option to actually be able to stay in. We're looking for sailers that are going to perform at a high level. It really goes to making sure we have a very talented, and very capable force. So the sailors that do want to get out, I've actually done a number of these over the last couple of months and interviewing them, and none of them are getting out due to dissatisfaction of what they do. They love being in the Navy, but they have other aspirations outside the Navy, or for possible family reasons that they want to get out. But out of all the interviews, again, within my lifelines that I've done on board my ship, no one's getting out because they're unhappy with what they do.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So from my perspective on the submarine force, I would say first and foremost, this is a difficult business that we do. We ask a lot of our sailors and of our officers, and we ask a lot of our families. But most everyone that I encounter understands that when they sign up. They recognize the challenge. Frankly, for many of them, that's why they choose the service, so they can come in and essentially test themselves and provide everything they can in support of the nation and really kind of see where they fall out when ranked against some very competitive people. So many of us are attracted to that challenge. But over the years, it does take a toll, as you know, and it does start to have an impact on both the individual and the family. In terms of biggest impact, though, I would tell you at the deck plate level, my perspective is uncertainty and instability, whether it be in operational schedules, whether it be in budgets and continuing resolutions, whether it be in shifts in locations of depot availabilities, home port changes, last-minute modifications, and frankly, our permanent change of station orders process, where we used to be able to get sailors' orders at a minimum of 6 months prior to their transfer, and now we're routinely seeing that inside 3 months that they have for themselves and their families to prepare to move, many times cross-country. That has a significant impact and causes significant strain for the family and the sailor. And in some cases, it seems as if we write that off as a cost of doing business based on the current fiscal uncertainty and instability. But I would argue that that shouldn't be placed on the backs of our sailors and their families. And so it's the uncertainty and instability, I think, that really has the biggest detrimental impact.
I think that's a consistent response we hear to the budget issues and the way we've handled the budget over the past few years from across the spectrum of people dealing with the military and inside the military. I guess maybe Captain Odenthal, just ask you maybe more, invite you to give sort of your take on your readiness challenges in your particular field, and also maybe comment specifically on the overall CB force. It's been cut by quite a bit, and maybe you could sort of tell us what deployment locations are not being supported, cuts, how they're affecting your ability to train effectively, retain critical skill sets.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned our reduction in the force. So we've gone over, coming out of 15 years of war, we've reduced the size of the CB force from what was 21 Naval Mobile Construction Battalions, which is our main unit of action is a Naval Mobile Construction Battalion, an NMCB. We had 21. We've reduced over the last 5 years down to 11. Of that, we had 9 were active duty battalions. We're down to 6 on the active side, and we went from 12 down to 5 on the reserve side as well. So that's close to a 50% reduction of the force and what we have available in CB units. With that, today the size of our force at 11 battalions is sized properly for our response to operational plans, and we have that ability to support the plans required in major conflict. We also, with those units, support the combatant commanders with forward forces as well. And we've gone down to, right now, we deploy 2 battalions of active duty CBs that are always forward deployed out of the force of 6 battalions, as well as about 200 reserve CBs that we have mobilized at this point now, and that we use for OCO missions as well in the Central Command and Africa Command area as well. So with that, we've gone from our ability was we would maintain 3 active duty battalions forward deployed at any one time, as well as during the war effort, usually a full reserve battalion forward for 4. We're down to that 2.3, as we say now, 2.3 battalions we keep forward. With that, we still maintain those forces across the globe. We support those perhaps at the same sites that we did in the past, but at reduced numbers. And when it comes to the requirements that we're asked for the COCOMs and the Global Force Management, we're supporting about 80% of what is requested from the COCOMs. That additional piece goes back to the combatant commanders, and they have the ability to look at other services as well for engineer resources. So I can't really speak to what the impact is of that, unable to support that last 20% that the combatant commanders take.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of you again for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
As I mentioned at the outset, we've been privileged to have the chairman of the full committee with us throughout this hearing, and I'd like to now recognize Chairman Thornberry for any comments or questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to thank both subcommittees, not only for today's hearing, but for taking the time and effort to go to Norfolk and ask questions, listen, and see for yourselves. It is significant. 10 members were concerned enough to go do that this week. Having visited some military installations myself, asking these questions, I believe there's no substitute for that. So thank you for doing that and then bringing the witnesses here. And thank y'all for making the time and effort so some of the rest of us could hear. I'm struck by the secondary effects that y'all have been describing. So you get a backlog of overhauling a ship, and then another ship runs out of time life. You got to tie it up to the dock, and it's those secondary, tertiary effects that I think are not obvious unless you ask the questions, and so that's been very helpful. Captain Stearns, I want to ask, I guess, a couple things, because a lot of what I've done has been talking to pilots and mechanics and so forth, a lot of whom deal with the F-18s. Admiral Davidson said Eisenhower's about ready to go, and it's ready to go. At the same time, you've made the point that for those carriers that are not just about to go, they're not getting the training that they need. I've talked to Marine pilots who are getting less than half the number of training hours they were supposed to get. And so some of us think of that kind of like cramming for an exam, you know? You can do it the night before. Sometimes you can get by. It's probably not the best way to study. But explain to us what that means for pilots. I mean, can you catch up in the last month or two before you deploy for the training that you missed for the previous months? I mean, how does that work?
And thanks for the question. How that works, the Navy, as you know, works under a kind of a tiered training system. So we like to kind of feed the hours and then ramp them all the way up to deployment. The Marines are at what's called a T2 level. They're at a constant level as well. So there's some differences. But I'll speak to the Navy's point is absolutely, sir, if you're not feeding the hours and letting them fly the hours in the maintenance phase, and I call it, there's a difference between currency and proficiency. So currency, we talk about 11 hours a month baseline just to be safe to fly the aircraft. Proficiency means you're getting the 14 hours a month in maintenance phase and all the way up through deployed phase, which folks are getting. But if they're sitting in a lengthy maintenance phase, sometimes 1, 2, 3 years, waiting for the carrier to come out, and they're getting reduced hours, that net effect over time absolutely plays into their experience level. And once they get into a increased op tempo, for example, the Bush coming out probably will be under kind of a compressed cycle as well. It takes a little bit of learning curve, and there is some risk involved in going from a kind of a slower op tempo as it speeds up to a higher op tempo as the pilots get put through the training regime. So they're the commanding officers, the carrier air group commanders, the CSG admirals, they all that is mitigated in what we call ORM, operational risk management. And if skippers are told if they absolutely are not ready to go with their pilots in a crawl, walk kind of run is what you're talking about. If they're not able to crawl first and then walk first and then run, they're not going to just come out of the gates running. So we assess that risk all the time as well.
The other thing that has occurred to me is, as I've asked these questions, is I think of readiness too narrowly. I tend to think of it as operations and maintenance accounts. You know, you train, you repair the aircraft or the ships or whatever. But I've talked to mechanics who are working 7 days a week trying to keep old aircraft going. And I'm convinced, and I'm inviting your comment and see if you agree or disagree, that we can cut so many people in strength, or particularly in some specialties, that we can never get ready. And I watch the numbers as the average experience of mechanics in the Marine Corps has been going like this because they're leaving. Mm-hmm. And yet we're asking them to do more complicated things to keep 1980s aircraft with lots of hours flying on them. So I guess my point is, in strength, or the number of people at least, plays a role in readiness, as does modernization. Because in some ways, the only way we're going to fix some of these helicopters and airplanes is getting new ones. I mean, we can only use duct tape and baling wire so long. And so I'd invite you, as you've looked at these problems, do you agree with me, or do you have other comments, that readiness is not just about putting more money into O&M accounts, it's about this bigger picture?
It's absolutely correct. And what I concerns me is the maintenance phase units. And we're down to people, and the people here are experienced, and they're doing it, but we're at the point now where if I lose one experienced maintenance chief or one experienced first class that gets sick or he's med down for some reason leaving on deployment, I have no reach back. So I have to reach back into not only parts and planes, I reach back into people. I mean, there's last minute saves just to get the Ike out the door of people who are, whatever issue it is, there's no depth with people. The other part of that is maintenance phase. My squadrons, because the depots are backed up or they send it out earlier than normal, these maintenance phase squadrons, it's all on the backs of the sailors to fix these jets that should already kind of show up ready to go for them to train with. So we're seeing that with the backs. And also, we talked about cannibalization, moving parts around. Their sailors are getting really good at that now, but that's not their main job to show up at that. So they're forced into cannibalization, doing parts. They're getting good at it all, but again, that's more time spent, like my compatriot said, grabbing that part from another aircraft, bringing it across that side of the base, and instead of just kind of doing the phase maintenance for itself. So there is a backlog, and there is a cost for all that in maintenance phase of they spend a lot of time just building to get their 3 or 4 jets to use in that phase to train with. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, yeah,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, I know you directed that question to Captain Stearns, but
No, I'd
if you
appreciate
don't mind.
because it's just because I've spent a lot of time talking to pilots and aircraft, but obviously with the submarines and ships, I'd like to know.
Yes, sir. I think your comments are spot on, and I absolutely agree that readiness is much bigger than maintenance budgets and maintenance execution and modernization and those types of things. Maintenance also, or I'm sorry, the readiness also depends on personnel, obviously, and you talked about in strength. And for the submarine force in particular, I would tell you that our overall submarine force health is good. So our manning our submarines is our priority, and we man at about 100 to 103% fill, which means number of bodies on board, and we're at about 95, 96% fit, which means that those bodies have the exact amount of training, the proper Navy enlisted classification codes to do the jobs that they're in. They're at the right rate, rank, those kind of things. So we're doing a pretty good job at that. But if you look at the submarine force billet structure over the last 15 years, what you'll see is we've reduced our ultimate number of people in the submarine force by about 35%. Now, we've done that with no change in our ability to deploy submarines and no change in the number of patrols, strategic deterrent patrols that we execute. And so when I was at Naval Submarine Support Center in Kings Bay, I used to tell all the new incoming submariners that I would argue that each of them is more important today than any submariner ever has been to submarine readiness. Because if I lose one of those members, as Captain Stearns said, I have less and less of an ability to provide a ready spare, if you will, if something happens to that individual. So in our effort to lean the force over the last 15 years, which we've done a very good job of that, much of that coming from shore, and so we've leaned much of our shore staffs, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but in our effort to do that, we have gotten to the point where our bench depth, our ability to respond to what we call unplanned losses, is severely limited. An unplanned loss is when a sailor that reports on board a submarine for permanent duty has to leave that submarine before his planned rotation date due to any number of reasons. The primary drivers in the submarine force are medical reasons because of our stringent medical requirements. That's about 39% of our unplanned losses. The second is mental health issues, ability to cope with the stressors that come with submarine life and duty in the submarine force. And then the third leading cause is disciplinary, but that's only about 12%, so much smaller. So those three are about 82% or so of our total unplanned losses. Unplanned losses in the entire submarine force number over 700 a year. From our active operational submarines, we lose about 700 people per year, force-wide. And so we recognized many years ago that's a lot of people. And so we really started taking a vested interest and going after how can we improve that. And one of the things that we've done, I've heard Captain Odenthal talk about the mental health pilot program, embedded mental health. So here at Submarine Squadron 6, we have generated an embedded mental health program over the past 2 years. The reason for that is because what we were seeing was many of our sailors that were having difficulties adjusting to submarine life, whether it be them, their families, or anything else, would often not talk to anybody about their issues until they became so significant that it was too late to really help them. And at that point, they had to become a loss to the force. We have a stress continuum. It goes from green to yellow to orange to red. And many of those sailors were presenting, and for much of my career, sailors would present to the medical community after they were in the orange or red sector. So it was really too late. At that point, you're in casualty control. By embedding the mental health pilot program at the waterfront, we have one mental health professional, a psychiatrist, and we have two corpsmen, staff members with him. So it's a staff of 3. But by doing that, what we've been able to do is develop that trust with the command leadership, with the sailors themselves, and with that office to understand the complexities associated with submarine life, and to have those folks present with their issues much, much earlier when they're trending toward yellow, possibly trending toward orange, but plenty of time left to do something about it and continue to keep the sailor at sea on a submarine. The program thus far in 2.5 years has been highly successful, and we have taken our unplanned losses in the squadron. This is due to psychological reasons only. We had 26 in fiscal year 12. In fiscal year 15, we had 5. So we've reduced that number by 80% simply by having that embedded mental health pilot. And so for us, as a force, that's something that we are pursuing, establishing funding for in every submarine home port, again, to go after those unplanned losses that we can go after. But we're doing that and we're taking all this effort because we recognize we don't have the bench depth that we've had 10, 15 years ago to respond. And in fact, as Captain Stearns said, we are in fact cannibalizing people just like we cannibalize parts to get the mission done.
And if I just may just give you, again, a single unit perspective from my ship right now. So we've already talked about the cannibalization. Just to give you numbers, currently Normandy is in a maintenance phase right now, but I have 13 parts that have been cannibalized from my ship to support the current strike group getting ready for deployment. And we don't cannibalize parts that aren't mission critical. These are all mission items that have very specific critical function on board these ships. So 13 of those parts have been taken from my ship over the last month and a half just to get the strike group ready to go. Just like Admiral Davidson says, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that strike group's going out. But even if I wasn't in a maintenance phase, I could not possibly surge right now. I've had, for example, one of the parts I had to give up was a cable harness for my spy radar. Obviously, a very critical function for an air defense ship. So without that capability right now, I'm impacted significantly mission-wise. Cannibalizing people. Even though my manning is, I have good fit and fill numbers on board my ship currently, I'm still having to support the deployers right now. I have 4 sailors that are currently identified to go out with this deploying strike group right now to fill some of those gaps right now. So we're cannibalizing parts and people. So therefore, our surge capability is certainly impacted. Last thing, just real briefly, is you had highlighted what truly is readiness, and you were suggesting there's another perspective to it. There's certainly a readiness from a readiness to take on that high-end fight that we reference. That training, the very specific training that we need to make sure that we have the confidence and thus readiness to engage in that high-end fight is it needs to be developed further. Thank you.
You've all been very patient with us, and we have to impose on your patience just a little bit longer. We have just a few more questions. And let me just be clear about one thing. Your duty is to defend our country, but our duty, the duty of the members sitting on this subcommittee and this full committee, is to defend you. The least we should be doing is getting you the resources that you need. The least we may be able to do is to describe to the American people what you need, and that you've helped us with tremendously here today. And I want to try to just bring a little more clarification of that. And Captain McRae, you talked a little bit earlier today about the importance of a captain being able to take his ship out and then to do the improvements, I think were your words that you had, raising the standards. Would it be fair to call that the edge? As he takes it from what you would say were the minimum things that you would check off to go, and in that period of time that he is taking that ship out, that's where he really develops that edge that he would have if we were in a fight.
Yes, sir. In my personal opinion, I believe that you would call that the edge. To be clear, we train every day in the submarine force, and we are very serious about our training. And we have the perspective that our submarines have to be capable at all times, whether in a deployed status, a non-deployed status, in a maintenance availability, it does not matter. We are ready to execute if called upon, given the amount of resources and the time to get ourselves there. But our commanding officers are tasked with making sure their ships are fully ready to provide the readiness required of them, no matter what part of the cycle that they are in. So we maintain that constant focus on readiness. And an example of that is when I was on the USS Pittsburgh back in 2002, 2003, 2001, I apologize, after the attack of 9/11, we had just started a maintenance avail. And without any direction or guidance, we immediately, another department head and I, who I was also department head at the time, began putting that ship back together and getting ready to go to sea because we didn't know what was coming, but we wanted to be ready for it. And I use that as my personal example. That example applies to all of our submarines and all of our submarine leadership. So we do pay attention to that every day. However, as you said, many times certifications and inspections provide the command a list and a host of corrective actions, things that they can do better, things that they could go and work on, things that they can improve on. And that time alone at sea to be able to operate and really stress the ship is really working on how are they going to go after those identified deficiencies. How are they going to solve those problems that have been identified, whether internally by their own assessment programs or externally by other writers that may have more experience and have seen better things and be able to point them in the right direction to steer their training and their performance. But when does all that really get put together so that it's usable and so that it makes an impact on the ship's performance? It's during those times when they're alone at sea. And I have seen that several times during my tour at Squadron 6, where a submarine comes through the deployment preparation program. They continue to have many things that they need to go work on, and then we give them some time at sea, and guess what? They do a great job, and they work on those things, and then when they go overseas and they get ridden by forward deployed commanders, all we hear are what a great job they're doing and how fantastic the crews are performing. So we've seen that time and time again with our deploying submarines.
Well, I had one of captains of one of our subs who described it exactly like you did. He said that period of time is when they develop their edge. And he said, obviously, they can sail the sub out, they can do the things they need to do, but if they had to get in a high-end fight with a peer competitor, that's when they desperately need that edge. And what he worried about was whether or not he was losing that time to create the edge. So I worry that some of our readiness may be losing that edge that we may need in a high-end fight. And then the second thing I hear you telling me is just what Captain Stearns is saying. We worry about our bench, too, that you have to reach back to get. And then the other thing I would ask you about is this. You know, you look at this every day. You see the needs and what our subs can do. We now worry because we're only able to meet 39% of our combatant commanders' needs for attack subs around the globe. What does that mean in terms of the 61% we're not meeting? And I know you can't talk about all of that, but what you can talk about here, what's the risk that puts on the table?
Yes, sir. So clearly, I'm not a geographic combatant commander, but you know, from my perspective, again, we deploy our submarines to be plug and play. They can operate in any environment. They can accomplish all submarine force missions and all capabilities and provide those to the combatant commander when tasked, and they can do it on very short notice. And we have seen that happen since my time at Squadron repeatedly, where submarines will start with one mission and skill set in mind and will be shifted, which is one of the reasons that we do robust training that covers all possible missions, not just those we expect them to be tasked with. So as you reduce the number of submarines available for the combatant commanders, as you said, and again, I'm kind of speaking out of turn here because I'm speaking for their perspective, but there are clearly things that are occurring in the world that we would not have coverage on. It can be a myriad of things. It can be the continued Chinese, buildup and the continued deployments of their submarines further and further with farther and farther reaches to different parts of the world. It can be intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance missions to gain valuable intelligence to provide the Congress and the nation so that we can make decisions about the right courses of action moving forward. It can be interdiction operations. It can be monitoring operations. There are lots of things, and it could be just having the right number of missiles, if you will, shooters available for a particular mission area or a particular time in our nation's life. And so there are a number of unfunded requirements, if you will, that there's just no one there to cover. And at that point, you get down to prioritizing based on the most critical, or what we assume are the most critical, recognizing that there will be a gap there in what we're able to maintain coverage on and awareness of, which would then make our efforts a little more inefficient.
Captain Stearns, I think would agree that the ability of your pilots to fly gives them that edge, and when they don't have that flying time, we lose that edge. You talked about the lack of a bench as well, I think, that you might have. One of the things that's concerned me is the Navy has proposed to limit the Carry Air Wing 1 for up to 4 months without any flying time at all. What would that mean?
That means, you save maybe a quarter, $9 to $13 million for an air wing to fund that a quarter. So by bringing down an air wing, we know after 3 months we call it cold iron. They just shut it down, and it means that the maintenance troops aren't training on those jets. It means the pilots are losing 3 to 4 months of flight hours that not only worry if those pilots are going to make the next deployment, that feeds into that, but also it's those pilots that are going to train our future pilots that are building those hours. So now I got a gap there as a guy shows up to an instructor role who maybe doesn't have as many hours.
So you're not only losing your edge, but you're kind of losing your ability to backfill too by additional.
Never going to get those hours back.
Never get it back.
Never get it back. And then, but on the backside of that, losing an air wing for 4 months not flying, which we did back in 2009, 2010, it's going to take me 3 times the amount and 3 times the cost to get them back up to speed.
What do your pilots think of that?
There were some rumblings of that coming down, and that will just drive morale straight down into the down to the bottom down there.
Captain Odenthal, we all know, but can you tell people who are listening to this perhaps at home what the Seabees do? And I think you did say that you were down to half that force. Tell us how this is impacting the deployments for our sailors that have experienced and what that tempo has been like over the last few years for them.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. So the Seabees, simply to put our mission, we are a construction unit, military. We build, we fight is our logo, and that is what we do. We are able to do high-end construction in any environment out there, defend it ourselves, and take care of ourselves. I like to think of our mission really is about these gentlemen to my right. My job is to build, maintain, repair, and defend as necessary those forward operating bases in a time of conflict that allows, again, these gentlemen to my right, the Marine Corps, Navy Special Warfare, to operate forward, keep their presence forward, and be able to replenish, rearm, and refuel close to the fight and get back into the fight. That is the heart of what we do as Seabees. As far as the ops tempo with the reduction there, we look at certainly with the reduction in the number of units, we are very quickly into the reserve when we talk about response to a conflict, where again, bench depth is something that reflects well with me there. We much quicker get to requiring those reserve units to operate forward and come to a fight if we need them as well. And there's concerns with the timeline we have for getting those units prepared when we mobilize them as well, and our ability to move more of that training to their pre-mobilization time frame to get them forward. So certainly on our reserve side, we worry about the training hours, the contact time we have with them, both on the funding level, but also from the fact that we realize the more time I have with a reserve that requires training takes away from that civilian employer piece, and it stresses out that individual as well. On the active side and both the reserve, our ops tempo coming off of the time of war, if you talk to an average E6, a first-class petty officer in one of my commands, most likely has done 5 or 6 combat or high-stress deployments to a austere environment along with others. So as we go forward, we certainly, we spoke about embedded mental health. We work resiliency issues quite hard, have invested in those things to help our sailors, our Seabees, be full up around and be prepared for those next deployments.
Good, thank you. And the last question I'd have for each of you is this. Last night I was talking to a former Secretary of the Navy, and he told me that one of the things that he did when he would come on a ship or a carrier is he would go get the chief, and he'd say, you carry me around and show me what's going on, because he said two things. He said the chief is going to hear everything and probably see everything, you know, on that ship. If I could ask you this, if I went to any of the chiefs, if I went to someone who you could say, yep, this guy hears all the stories from the guys and he sees what's happening, what would be the thing they would tell us about readiness concerns that they would be saying, I want to tell this committee this? Or what's the story they would tell us about the impact this readiness is having on one of the men or women serving under them?
Thank you for the question. I have a high degree of confidence that any of the chiefs in my mess would say that their biggest concern right now is our ability to be able to get out of my current maintenance phase on time. The cascading impact of, and just for reference, Normandy is just at the end of our second month of a 7-month maintenance period right now. Their concern, as is mine, is that if we are extended in any way due to possible lack of resources or unable to get any new or growth work completed on time, has a cascading impact that winds up compressing, which I'm sure everyone's aware of and has heard of, the compression of training cycles and what the cascading impact is. A late delivery from my maintenance period winds up with taking away and all those training requirements I still need to do to get to my intermediate and advanced level training still need to occur, but they get compressed. And so Congressman Thornberry had mentioned it's just like cramming for a test. And the chiefs are very much an integral part of this. If we take away their ability to influence and help train and make sure maintenance is getting done on these ships because we've compressed it all because of a late delivery of a ship from its maintenance period, that's a significant problem to our readiness.
Captain McRae?
Yes, sir, Chairman. So from a submarine perspective, I would tell you the chiefs in Submarine Squadron 6 and on our units have all felt the impact of these depot maintenance delays that we talked about, and they can all tell you the story of the Albany. They can tell you the impacts that are occurring on Boise because they see and they feel that. The next thing I think they see and feel quite a bit are spare parts availability. We didn't talk about that a lot in terms of submarines, but that's something that we certainly wrestle with as well. Cannibalizations are relatively frequent in the submarine force. In the submarine force total, we do about 1.5 cannibalizations every single day to keep our submarines at sea.
Explain what that means.
So basically that's where we have a critical need. A part fails on a unit that's operational, either at sea already or needs to get underway to accomplish a mission. And we look in the supply system, and the supply system either says there are no parts available at all, or if there is one, it's not going to be able to be here for a few months or so, well outside the timeline required. And so in that case, then the only resort we're left to is to look for a boat that has a similar piece of equipment that is not as high on the priority scale for operations, and we pull that piece from that boat and install it on the boat that's about to conduct operations. That results in a subsequent backfit on the previous boat that had lost that capability, and it also decrements that boat's ability to go out and operate and that surge capacity that we talked about in that surge tank in responding to emergent threats as they come up, or to tasking as it comes up as the world situation changes. And so it does, hurt our longer term readiness from that perspective. The other thing I would tell you is bench depth. I think they feel the impacts of the bench depth, and I think every submariner would tell you that certainly when we lose someone, we're challenged. But quite frankly, many times the manning and distribution system is even challenged to get the appropriate sailor, a chief petty officer, for example, to relieve on board at the planned rotation date, which has been on the books for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, but they don't have an available chief to go and relieve the chief that's on board, and everybody understands if you don't have a relief, you don't leave. So now, when I've been expecting to transfer in, let's say, March of 2016, my transfer is held up indefinitely until they can find a suitable replacement, get him on board, and we can conduct turnover. That's good for the command, but it's terrible for the family. And I think they would tell you, they could give you several examples of that occurring on their ships and with people that they know.
Stearns?
My VFA chiefs, Hornet chiefs, are going to tell you where are my parts. They're going to walk right in there. When am I getting is my aircraft going to come out of the depot on time? Because they're not coming out in time just due to the capacity. Not that the product coming out is poor, but it's just they're overloaded with capacity. They're going to ask about when am I getting more chiefs, supervisory chiefs to help build these jets that I'm now burdened with out here as well. And then also, when are you going to, Commodore, when are you going to quit taking jets from me? Not only to feed the deployed forces, but we also feed our test and eval units in our high-end fighting out in Air Wing Fallon. So we're donating jets out to them as well to train for that high-end fight. Right now, those guys don't have jets because everything gets pulled from them forward. So I have fleet jets right now supporting test and eval for future software changes, upgrades, just to keep feeding that high-end fight. So they're going to ask for parts, people, when am I getting my jets out, and then quit taking my jets.
Captain Odenthal?
Yes, sir. So CB chiefs are normally shy. That would be a joke, but they would most likely, with my chiefs, our technical skills and proficiency is a concern. As we come out of the war era, we've done a lot of contingency type construction, and we're working on a proficiency to make sure we have those high-end skills to do any construction. And so our constant need for more time to train to those missions and prepare for that construction mission certainly is one of their highest concerns, as well as the maintenance and upkeep of our equipment. With the reduction in the size of the force, we actually are fairly well equipped today with the equipment we have as we reduce sizes. But we continue to use that in austere environments, keeping up with the maintenance of that equipment and thinking of the future 3 to 5 years down the road with the replacement is a concern we have across the force, and being able to maintain that equipment ready to go to war.
Mr. Whitman, any more questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Captain Odenthal, I wanted to drill down a little bit. You had made some mention earlier with the numbers within the Naval Construction Group 2 force, but overall, you spoke about 60% of your force now is in the reserve element. But within that 60%, 30% of those are the skilled tradesmen. And now being part of the reserve unit, they take the skills that they learned in sea school, and now they practice those for a couple of weeks out of the year. And on a normal demand basis, that's probably okay. But let's say we get into a situation, let's say in PACOM, where we have to surge and we have to do a lot there in spinning up or to support whatever may be going on in that theater. The question then becomes is, where does the surge capacity come in, and where does the ability for us to be able to function with that large a level of reserve component keep us where we need to be as far as capability, and not necessarily from the immediate readiness element, but the ability to surge in the event of a conflict in areas like that. I'd like to get your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question. So as you mentioned, our reserve force now with Seabees, historically we think of most of our reserve Seabees coming from the construction industry. Right. Today we find ourselves in today's environment that about 30% of our reserve force are actually in the construction industry. The others are in other career fields, which means from my side is I have, rather than counting, assuming that experience level that comes from the civilian trades, I have to teach those skills to my Seabees that come. Yeah. We have developed what we call the Readiness Training Platform, where we've relocated those units to Gulfport, Mississippi, Port Hueneme, California, which is our 2 hubs for Seabees across the fleet, rather than having them go to their drill sites, local drill sites for every drill period, they come to our sites where we have the equipment, the tools, the instructors to teach those skills and to work with them. That has been successful, but it's somewhat limited, again, because of the time and the contact time we have as well. What happens when we talk about mobilization of those forces, anything that I can't do in that regular pre-mobilization training period falls into the post-mobilization period. So we add those classes, we factor in that timeline to prepare them to go, whether it's that conflict or others, to make sure that we have that. We will not fill those Seabees One, if they're not prepared for combat, and two, if they're not proficient in their mission to be able to perform that. We won't put them forward. But it does adds time to our post-mobilization training for those reserves and able to get them out to the fleet as an effective member of the force.
Let me ask a couple questions about the budget. In light of sequestration and the budget cuts there, I know the Navy has transitioned to having contract work for naval facilities. So the question then becomes, again, what happens in a surge scenario? What happens with being able to generate consistent readiness? On top of that, too, now with OCO being a larger element of the budget, and again, trying to generate readiness within the OCO element, give me your perspective both previously and where we are with sequester, and that's kind of fanned out a little bit now, but it's coming back again, but also in how you generate readiness in that realm of contracting out a fair amount of work, and then how does OCO and those dollars affect you in your needs going forward with what you have to generate within that current budget realm?
Right. Thank you. So across NECC, currently 22% of this year's budget is funded by OCO. We're heavily leveraged in OCO. Last year it was 47%, so moving in the right direction overall funding. With the forces I have deployed today, those 200 reservists I have are all funded by OCO, and that's how we get them forward and use them to meet those demands from the COCOMs. As far as construction, we in work that's contracted, the forward piece, we take on those missions. We've got our units fully employed forward as well. In Homeport, our normal, our first choice for training for construction is to pick up projects from the Navy, smaller projects that our units can employ, whether it's on the base in Gulfport, across the southeast region, or even up to Norfolk, where I put troops to build extensions to the galleon, those sort of things. So we try to leverage other people's money, other pieces of the budget to, one, to support the maintenance backlog across the Navy, but then also to get that training as best we can for our Seabees.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Courtney, I promised all of you at the beginning that at the end we would give you time if there's anything you needed to clarify or anything you felt we needed to put on the record about our readiness now. This is the time to do that. And Captain Odenthal, why don't we start with you and we'll work backwards because we've been doing it the opposite way. And we just want to thank you all for being here and look forward to any wrap-up remarks you may have.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here, and I have nothing further for the record.
Good.
Thank you.
Captain Stearns?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk about our readiness. The only thing I'd have to finalize adding is after being a commanding officer, and then the job I had after that was aviation training and readiness, and now as the Commodore job, we've gone kind of full spectrum of cost-wise readiness. We were down to the bone of exactly what we needed, and then what I've noticed after sequestration in the CR, after being in the man, train, and equip business basically for the past 5 years, is that we're kind of now just looking to get to the finish line, especially with our A through D F-18s. They were never going to fly here, so it's not about cost-wise readiness. It's about getting to the finish line and gapping the capability here as well. So it's just getting more expensive to maintain older airframes out there. And then I would just say the platforms we have are extraordinary, and what we have coming is extraordinary. But we have we're tasked now with maintaining that and extending that life, and there's a cost to that is just beyond cost-wise readiness. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the forum.
Thank you, Captain. Captain Robertson?
I also appreciate the opportunity. I shared a very short story with you with an exercise I executed right before I deployed last year in early 2015. I'd like to put it on record here, the value it was to me as a commanding officer. In this particular exercise, all of the cruiser destroyer units assigned to the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group participated in an integrated live fire exercise. Within this exercise, we had 8 high-speed target vessels that were attempting to penetrate the battle space around our strike group. We were able to employ layered defense using F-18s dropping live ordnance, and then helicopters employing live ordnance, and then finally getting into the within the vital area and all the ships being able to employ their self-defense measures, 5-inch CWIS and then also small arms. It's some of the best training that I had experienced and very realistic. And one of the things that gave me as a soon to deploy commander absolute confidence that I was ready, that my team was ready, that my weapon systems were ready for that type of fight. We truly need to start to get to that level here when we're talking about anti-ship cruise missiles. We need to make sure that we have the infrastructure that can flex strike groups to give them, and we need to have the targets, we need to have the ordnance, we need to have the facilities to be able to train to this and exercise this, so we can truly make sure that we have the confidence in our weapon systems to go out and perform at that high end that we need to. So I just wanted to share, as far as our readiness piece, we got to make sure that we're ready for that high-end anti-ship cruise missile capability. The lethality, I know that my leadership team's certainly been working here within this body here to make sure that we are getting the right lethality out to the ships as fast as we can. The only other comment of that is ensuring that we have the sufficient volume of that lethality capability. No one's ever going to shoot just one at United States at a strike group, okay? And if we're going to be ready for a high-end threat, we need to make sure we have sufficient bat to go out there with. And then the last thing that I'd like to just address real quickly is just the predictability and stability of resources. To really optimize the fleet response plan, we need the predictability and stability of consistent resources that we can plan to and really get the gains that are designed within the optimized fleet response plan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Captain McRae.
Sir, thank you, sir. As my colleague stated, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and discuss our challenges that we face every day from a readiness perspective with you all. We appreciate your interest and your concerns. From my perspective, the insufficient funding levels that we've received to meet all of our requirements, coupled with the budgetary uncertainty and the instability that we've seen over the last several years, are having detrimental effects on our readiness. And we've discussed a lot of the specifics today. There are many more out there that we haven't had an opportunity to discuss today. It is a very complex problem with a very complex impact that permeates our forces. So as I think Mr. Whitman captured earlier, it is a complex situation, and those secondary and tertiary effects and impacts are much more significant, I think, than many people realize. So the opportunity to shed light on those, I think, is important. And moving forward, we would just appreciate the continued support of not only the House Armed Services Committee, but also the Congress in meeting our needs so that we can meet your requirements. Thank you, sir.
We want to thank you for, again, your service to our country. Thank you for what you're getting ready to do, and thank you for taking time to come up here and enlighten us. Admiral Davison, thank you for being here and for your service. And if no one has any additional questions, Kelly, Zach, thank you for coming up and for being supportive of your families. And with that, we're adjourned.